One of the most famous images of Cernunnos comes from Paris, where it was found under the choir of Notre Dame in 1716. It's one in a series of 4 blocks that were originally piled on top of each other to form a pillar. There are other deities on the various sides of these blocks, some Roman and some Celtic. One block is Cernunnos, Myrtulos, Castor, and presumably Pollux. Another shows Jupiter, Essos, a 3-horned bull labeled Taurus Trigarinos, and Vulcan. A third is Fortuna, Mars, perhaps Venus, Mercury, and Rosmerta, and 2 unidentified goddesses. The final block tells us that it was dedicated in the reign of Tiberius by a group of sailors, which is why the pillar is called the Pilier de Naut, the Pillar of the Sailors. These would have been those who plied their trade on the Seine River and might be called bargemen. This dedication raises the question of why sailors would have erected a monument that honored, among others, a god of animals. Also important is the inscription. Each of the gods is labeled, and on a Cernunnos block we can see the name Cernunno. The first and last letters have been lost, but it is reasonable to assume that the inscription originally read Cernunnos, and indeed that is how it is represented in 18th century engravings. The S ending is unremarkable, being simply the Gaulish nominative singular ending. The C can be restored by an assumed etymology based on Proto-Celtic karnos, meaning horn, antler. The no infix is common in Indo-European deity names, thus we have a name meaning antlered god. The man on the block of course has antlers, around each of which is a torque. We can tell from the other figures on this block that the Cernunnos image must have been sitting cross-legged. There isn't room for him to have been standing or sitting on a chair if his body is to be proportional. Because this is the only case where we have both an image and a name, and because its etymology is so clear, it has often been said to be a title rather than a name. We first need to answer the question of what the difference between them is. The best I can tell, when people say this, they are saying that the god had a real name that wasn't Cernunnos, and that he was called Cernunnos occasionally, but this wasn't considered essential to his identity. This is wrong for several reasons. First, the transparent etymology of the names of other deities hasn't prevented scholars from saying that they are names rather than titles. For instance, Epona clearly means horse goddess, which is just as descriptive of her as Cernunnos is of our god. Second, this involves a misunderstanding of how titles function in the Indo-European world, where they serve to specify a particular form, origin, or function of a deity. It is difficult to place this in the context of Cernunnos. In what way would Cernunnos be a specifier limiting the deity in form, origin, or function? Perhaps this is an out-of-date argument, because there are in fact other inscriptions to Cernunnos, although they are not accompanied by images. There are 2 identical ones from Luxembourg in Roman letters, which read to the god Cernunkos, one from southern France in Greek letters to Cernunnos, and one from Pollenza in Italy to Cernunno, which would be the dative of Cernunnos. Variations in spelling like this are common in Gaulish inscriptions, and could be due either to the lack of ability on the part of the inscriber, the difficulties adapting a language to a new alphabet, or in this case alphabets, or local variations in names. We find inscriptions to the thunder god Taranis in the form Tanaris, for instance. The final pre-Roman representation is on this coin from the Remi tribe. Here Cernunnos has a torque in his right hand, and his legs are as crossed as space will permit. His antlers have been crowded so they arch downward. The curved line on the back of the coin may be a displaced snake. Now we will look at the images from the Roman period, and from them, as well as from the earlier ones, see what shared characteristics we can find. Then we will be prepared to discuss their meaning.